They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. I would like to meet they one of these days. I have a few questions for them. Unlike the last time we spoke, there's been no elongated absence, no longing to hear my voice or to see my face, as the sip is back and on our regular schedule. So, welcome to the second part of episode 2 of our COVID-19 miniseries. In this episode, we talk to Anthony Romano, Vice President of Everest Surety, just another one of our industry titans. In life, being a parent means many things. Over time, the most important job of a parent is clear: to clean up your kid's mess. That is exactly what we talked to Anthony about. We spend this episode discussing surety and contractor default, and we get into who plays what role amongst the three parties that make up a surety contract. In a nutshell, the role a surety company plays when a contractor defaults on a job is to act as the parent, the guarantor, to step in and make things right by the obligee. We get into all of that and more regarding the wonderful and intriguing world of surety bonding, so please sit back, grab a drink, and enjoy the episode. Cheers! Tony, you're our guy. We're going to open things up with you. We haven't gotten into it yet, but surety bonding, it's a very important part of the bid process. The construction industry as a whole, many industries actually, but we're here to talk about construction. So Tony, I got a doozy for you. Hope you're ready for it.
Yeah.
What is surety?
Surety is really guaranteeing another party's obligation. So if I'm to give you an example, it's kind of like when a parent is crazy enough to guarantee their kid's car loan. So your kid is buying a car. They're primarily responsible for making the payments, but if they don't make the payment, mom and dad's got to come in and make the payments. So you're basically standing behind another party, and if they perform, you don't get called upon to do anything, but if they don't, then you have to come in and perform what they failed to perform. And most of our work, as you said earlier, is focused on the construction industry. And Carl and I were kind of going back and forth a little bit earlier. But what we do is we primarily have two different types of guarantees. The one guarantee is that we will guarantee that a construction company will complete the contract that they've undertaken, and that any subcontractor or supplier that works in that project who does not get paid, in the end will get paid. So we guarantee that a project gets completed and that everyone who worked on the project gets paid, so that at the end of the day, the owner of the project gets a lien-free project that's completed the way they want it and everyone's taken care of. That, in its basic sense, is what surety is all about. Most of what we do is tied to the construction industry and tied to really the public bid market that we were talking about earlier. So the law requires, the federal government laws and most of the state laws require that if there's going to be public money involved in putting together a project, that there has to be a surety bond to guarantee that the contractor working on the project will ultimately complete the project. So most of our work comes out of statutory regulations. That's what drives our industry. And it's really what makes the low bid system, again, what we're talking about, a functioning element. Because if you just hire the person with the cheapest price, in your own practice in life, you're not always going to get the best person. But you can do that in the low bid system, because if they don't perform, then the surety performs. And therefore, that's how that whole thing works together. So the taxpayers get low priced work, but it's guaranteed by a third party. If they can't perform, the surety will perform for them.
To that point, let's say surety didn't exist. How do you think that would affect the low bid system?
It would be much more difficult to do. You'd have people putting in very low prices. They wouldn't have the leverage of the surety standing behind them in order to ensure that they complete the project. So you'd have a lot of contractors who never finish the work. And just because you got like if you build your own house and you get the lowest price provider, and they come a couple of days, they don't show up, you have limited recourse over them other than the deposit than the money that you owe them if they haven't completed the job. So here, you're guaranteed that the project gets completed. So you're able to get the cost low for the project, and you're able to make sure the project ultimately gets done.
Yeah, so it's a nice little reassurance that this job is going to get done, right? It takes kind of the risk out of this, about what we would call a subcontractor default. So I think an important part of understanding surety is understanding the three parties to a surety contract, to a surety bond, whatever that may be. Can you walk us through that? Just the three parties in the relationship between all of them?
Yeah, surety is kind of unique because most contracts in the insurance business are really two-party contracts. This is a three-party contract, in that you have a construction company who is working on behalf of an owner, and then you have a surety that stands behind that construction contractor. So those are the three parties. And it works in that the owner has an obligation to pay the contractor for the work that they do. So that's one part of the triangle. And that the surety then guarantees the owner that if the contractor doesn't perform, they will step in the shoes and finish that work. Then the bottom part of the triangle is that the contractor has an obligation to the surety to make the surety whole if the surety has to come in and fulfill the work. So each party kind of has a lever over the other to make sure that they're honest and they do what they're supposed to do. The owner pays the contractor for what they're doing, the surety steps in their shoes, and then the contractor has to indemnify the surety if they have to then perform on their behalf. And that keeps the triangle together, and everyone's working together to make sure the project gets completed.
So the process of indemnification of, I guess it's going to be the principal here, right? Having to make the insurance company whole after they pay out a claim for a default, something like that. I think that's something new, right? Specifically to insurance individuals. It's very unique, right? I haven't seen anything like that before. Could you walk us through an example to kind of better understand this process?
Surety is a little bit different in that when you buy an insurance product, somebody is looking to transfer a risk that they hold to an insurance company. So if you don't want somebody to sue you because they slipped on your property, you buy casualty insurance so that you're able to protect yourself, and then another company has to pay that loss and you won't pay that loss. In the surety, you're not really transferring a risk, you're keeping the risk. You just have another party standing behind you to make sure that you fulfill your obligation. So in order for the whole thing to work, the surety, there has to be some incentive for the surety to want to do this beyond just the premium, because the amounts of exposure that we take on are significant. We could be writing bonds of $10 to $50 million, and then you aggregate them up in terms of if a contractor has, say, 10 different projects, we could have $150 million of exposure within our backlog to that one contractor. So to make all that work, the reason we do that is because if we were to ever pay out a loss, they're going to come in and indemnify us for that loss. Right. So that's what makes the incentives work, and that each, they want the bond in order to take on the work that they want to complete for a public owner. They need a surety to do that, and we're willing to backstop them because they're going to indemnify us if we have a loss. Right,
Tony, just to get a general idea, obviously you can't talk specifics, but you're talking about extending a credit line. What do you call it, a credit line? Right,
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So I have 10, 15, $50 million. What's the premium like on that, just so we could all get a grasp of that variance?
Sure. The premium is depending on, and a lot of different factors go into it, the type of work that the contractor does. So we talked earlier about a curtain wall or glazing contractor that's a higher risk subcontractor, so there's a higher price that goes along with that type of work. So anywhere from about 0.5% to 1% is what typically a contractor will pay for the bond premium. So if you have a $10 million bond, you're talking about anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 of premium in order to secure that risk.
Yeah, that's substantial. You can see how it's only going to really work with that indemnification process in place. Right?
Yeah, now the indemnification process sounds great in that, why wouldn't everybody be a surety? Because a surety can never lose. If they're going to get paid back, why wouldn't everybody do that? The reality is, though, typically a contractor doesn't fail because they want to fail. I think, as Carl alluded to earlier, they fail because they ran out of money. So the contractor is going to do everything they can to complete the project without getting the surety involved, because there's no reason to get the surety involved because you'd have to pay them back anyway. So they're going to exert all of their efforts to complete the job. When they fail to do that, it's because they had no more money. So although theoretically we're supposed to be paid back, we really come into play when the contractor doesn't have money, and ultimately we will not be paid back because the contractor doesn't have the money to pay us back.
Really?
That only happens in very, generally if you do your underwriting correctly, that doesn't really happen too often. And it can't happen too often, or you won't be in business too long.
You're without a job. I was going to say, is that the norm to for this actually not to work out in the end for you guys? Or?
No, it's a very small percentage. The industry has functioned on a loss ratio over the last 20 years of somewhere between 12 and 18%. It's very infrequent that happens. So it's very closely underwritten, and we spend a lot of time, working on and going through the things that Carl was talking about earlier to make sure that the customers that we're supporting, have the financial capacity in order to avoid those type of issues. So it is an unlikely scenario. But when it does happen, it is very expensive to fix. So it's a kind of product where you don't have a lot of frequency, but when it does happen, it's a huge severity issue for our business.
Right. In a claim scenario, let's say, like you outlined, a contractor runs out of money. First step for you guys is, well, if it's bad enough they're coming to you, it's bad. Do you get insight onto what's going on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Can you kind of foresee this happening and take steps to mitigate against that?
Yeah, we generally require that the contractors that we work with, they provide us, year-end financial information, generally audited, sometimes reviewed. And then usually they provide us quarterly information that gives us an indication of how they're doing financially It shows their backlog in terms of a work in progress report. So it shows us how every project is performing. We can see if they're losing money on this job, how much they're losing there, how their billings are working. So by doing that kind of analysis, you should be able to tell with some degree of foresight that something is not going right. And if this trend continues, maybe 6 to 12 months from now, you're going to have a problem. So unless there's fraud involved, it shouldn't be a total surprise that your contractor is having an issue. You should be able to see that, through the financial work that Carl and others do, that's kind of, it's leading you in that direction. So you do have the ability to kind of try to step in and try to help them through that a little bit. But it doesn't always work that way. But if you're underwriting consistently, you should be able to see that trend.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like you would want that, right? You would need that. You wouldn't want to underwrite these bonds if you weren't able to see what's going on, right?
Yeah, an insurance product, you underwrite it, once a year, you send out your policy, and then next year when the renewal comes up, then you start your process again. Whereas in surety, we're constantly underwriting the account because they're constantly bidding jobs. Every job is different. We have to make an evaluation of not only how their program looks today, but how that contract is going to look 2 and 3 years from now, because the bets that we're making today, usually a major construction project takes 2, 3, 4 years to complete. So that all of that process is continuous to make sure that everything we're doing, makes sense for the long term, not just today.
Yeah. So Tony, let me ask you, you as the surety underwriter, I'd assume the producer, right? The insurance agent involved as well, the accountants, finance guys from the contractor side, the insured side. You guys all getting together, setting up meetings to kind of plan strategy together? Are you guys involved in that at all?
We meet, usually we meet with the CEO and the CFO of the company at least once a year to get an overview of how things are going. We go over their financial performance. Sometimes we meet with them 2 or 3 times, depending on the company. Sometimes we go out, we visit their job sites to get a better understanding of how they're functioning, how they run their jobs. We go over their business plans, their strategy, who comprises their operational team. It's a really full underwriting gamut in terms of understanding, and this kind of comes to what we call the 3 C's. And we focus on credit of a company, the capacity, and their character. So we want to meet the management to understand that they're strong in terms of their character and what they represent and what they say they're going to do, they're going to be able to do. We underwrite their capital. Do they have enough financial wherewithal to finish the jobs that they're taking so that we don't have to step in down the road? And then their capacity, what is their experience in undertaking, building a project in New York City versus building a project in Ohio? What kind of subcontractor relationships do they have in different areas, and how do they go about managing the work? So we look at them from an operational standpoint, financial standpoint, and also, do they have the character? Will they complete what they say they're going to do?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you guys take such a holistic approach. You're involved in every facet of the industry, the business. You're on an intimate level with these guys. We talked offline. Sometimes these owners are putting their personal guarantee, right? Or
exactly.
indemnity agreements.
Yeah, in the agreement to indemnify us, many times the stakeholders of the company, part of the reason why you create a company is that you shield yourself from personal liability. But in order to get surety credit to the magnitude that they need, a lot of times we require that the owners of the company personally indemnify us. So they're allowing us to pierce the corporate veil in order to get to them if there's a problem down the road, because we want to know that they're all in with everything they have to complete the project, so therefore we don't have to get involved if there's issues.
That's why character is one of those 3 C's, right? So important when you're underwriting on. It seems like the obligation of bond is statutory, it's written into the contract. Are there any sort of alternatives that a contractor could use or employ instead of going out and getting a bond, or is that it? That's the requirement, that's what you got to do?
I mean, bonds are really the preferred source of guarantee in the U.S. But if you go outside the U.S., surety is just one of several different products that are used to guarantee performance. So overseas, there are letter of credits that are used instead of a surety bond. You see that less often here in the States, but sometimes that's an option for someone to provide a letter of credit instead of a bond. And then there's different types of insurance, subcontractor default insurance, owner control programs, things of that nature, where that's more of a product where the owner of the project is going to take some risk in terms of an deductible, and then there's an insurance product that's going to make them whole if there's a default underneath them, within some of the contractors that are working for them. There's different products depending on what they're looking to accomplish. Surety is good in that, for this reason, in that it's a conditional obligation. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that everyone has an incentive to work together. It's conditional in that the owner has to do what they said they were going to do. So therefore, they have to pay the contractor for what they did. Otherwise, they can't make a claim on the surety bond. And then the contractor has to do what they said, is that they have to complete the project according to the underlying contract terms and specs and all that. So that's kind of the back and forth that goes. Sometimes if you have a letter of credit, it's an unconditional guarantee where an owner can just draw down on that guarantee. The contractor has to pay out. It's not a proportional type of arrangement in that the owner has tremendous amount of leverage over the contractor. So it's not really a preferred instrument. But in some areas and in some product lines, it's, say the energy business, that's all the owner will take is a letter of credit. So it really depends too on the sector that you're working in.
So for these letters of credit, are they always going to a bank? Is there ever a situation when the owner is, quote unquote, putting their money where their mouth is? They're going to put the cash up, say like, hey, we're going to back this?
Usually what I'm talking about is a letter of credit that the contractor would have to put up to the owner, and then the owner can then draw down on that letter of credit as a payment if the contractor doesn't perform the way they're supposed to be performing.
Gotcha. I was just mulling over what you said. The owner, the stakeholders putting their own financial stake, right, into whatever it is, right? I got a question for you, Carl. Do you ever see this with some of your clients? Do you ever advise for this or advise against it?
Well, listen, at the end of the day, the advice is very simple. You cannot expect a third-party credit provider to put their skin in the game if you're not willing to put your skin in the game. If you're coming off a bad year and you're asking your surety, hey, help me out, or your bank, hey, help me out, you got to take the first step, and you got to be the first one to put the skin in the game. Be that $1, $1 million, $10 million, whatever that is. And that's the whole concept with personal indemnity at the end of the day. If you believe in your company, you believe in yourself, you're going to sign that document with the homestead exclusion, because we know the sureties don't want the homes. Nobody wants anybody's home.
You can't get it anyway.
Yeah.
What was that? You should get it anyway.
You can't get it anyway.
The homestead exclusion.
Yeah, right. Can't get it anyway. Put all that aside. The best advice is this. If it's a good surety, if it's a good relationship, you're going to produce, give them the indemnification, because you're betting on yourself at the end of the day. And personally, I'm always going to bet on myself because I know I can control how I work.
And that homestead exclusion.
The homestead exclusion just basically says that you're going to indemnify you're going to provide all of your assets as a personal indemnification, but the surety is going to exclude your house.
Yes.
If you lose everything, the surety is not going to go after you and make you sell your house as a reimbursement. You keep that to yourself. And the courts will look unfavorably upon that. They don't want a big bad insurance company taking people's houses away. So it's not really something you can get in many states anyway, based on the laws of those states.
Gotcha. Last question before we move on to Scott. We would be remiss if we didn't bring in COVID, right? So has underwriting changed in response to the COVID-19 crisis? What do you expect to happen now versus 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. I think it's definitely become more intensified. And I think Carl did a very good job explaining about PPP and some of the things that he gets involved with. I mean, really our focus now is talking to our contractors, finding out, what are they doing to protect themselves? Have they applied for the PPP loan? Has it been funded? What kind of cash flow do they have when they're making their cash flow projections, like Carl talked about? What kind of a buffer they have for the next 8 to 12 weeks, knowing that, work is not going to be 100% yet. For us, and this was alluded to earlier, I think most of the contractors we talk to right now seem to be okay. They seem to have, managed very quickly. They've adjusted their overhead. They laid people off. They're working as best as they can through the new provisions of how you social distance and limiting people on construction elevators and all that kind of stuff. It's really when everything comes back full tilt, and Carl talked about this, are they going to be able to fund that? Because there's always a delay in between when you requisition a project, the time it takes for an owner to pay you, and you're incurring all those costs until that process gets going again. And do they have the cash flow in order to float that maybe 60, 90, 120 days, because they're taking on a lot of costs and they're going from 0 to 100 or 50 to 100, depending on how much work they were doing. Can they fund that? And that's what we're focused on trying to understand.
And to bolt on to that, it's expensive enough. And, Scott and Tony in their respective roles, they've seen this. It's expensive enough to mobilize a project as is. To be told within 1 week, you have to shut down that project, secure everything that's on site, and now you got to go remobilize that. Nobody is ever taking that into account in any of these specifications and schedules. So that's an added cost. You have to remobilize a job, and in some cases, that could be more expensive than the initial mobilization.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tony, Carl, we see you guys bouncing off each other quite a bit. Is that just happening right here in this conversation, or do accountants and surety underwriters interact pretty closely out in the workforce as well?
Well, I feel bad because we left Scott out, but I mean, that's not intentional.
He's going to have his moment to shine. I'm telling you, he's going to hit this out of the park. Give it 2 minutes.
I would say that there is a close connection between surety and the accountants, because we are so dependent on Carl's product to make the decisions that we make. There's a lot of back and forth in trying to understand the product that Carl produces and how that influences, where we're going in the future in evaluating a contractor. So there is a very close connection between, we don't get to see the accountants as much maybe as we'd like to, but we certainly use their product every day.
Yeah, and to our standpoint, if Tony and his industry is not back in the construction industry, I don't have an industry. I'm out of business. So I got to give them all the information they need to make a qualified decision. I'll tell you, when new accounting guidance comes out, the first people we're educating on that new accounting guidance isn't our client. Our client did not care about ASC 606 revenue recognition. They told me, I'm not doing this. And I said, well, you're going to do it. You just don't know it yet. Tony's industry, they needed to know about it because it changed the whip. It changed what they're used to. So when new guidance comes out, we're not educating our clients as much as we're educating the surety, who I look at as really kind of my customer to my product.
Oh, man, Tony, thank you for all of that. Cheers to you. Let's take a sip.
Cheers.
Well done.
Wow, what an episode. I know I have a much better appreciation for my surety company growing up, my parents. All jokes aside, we really hope you enjoyed the conversation and have a much better understanding of how surety and contract default insurance works as a whole and in conjunction with one another. Please join us next week for part 3, where we talk money. Greenbacks, dinero, the Benjamins, fat stacks, bands. As we discuss premium financing with Scott Feuerzeig, Regional President of First Insurance Funding, one of the leading premium financing companies in the industry. See you soon.